Hi, this video is to show you how to start Project 1, design a relational database. First, let's create a working folder. So let's say we name it Database Design DD Project 1 P1, right? Now let's go to our website and download the needed document. The first one you need to have is the project note. So you can click here and download this file. So we got the project note, and you should read thoroughly from the beginning, starting with the goal and the project requirements and the instruction. Obviously, it's basically a review of what we have learned so far, especially the conceptual design and the logical design. The next document you need to download and want to read carefully would be the example of the project report. So just click here and download the file as well as the template for the project report. So to download the example, this is the file, and then the template. So these are the three essential files that you should start with. After reading the requirements, you can start doing the project step by step. So let's start with step 1. Define the business context. In this step, you need to make up. Just imagine a business situation. It could be a company that sells clothes, books, DVD, or could be a company provides some kind of service, anything. Could be an organization, could be a school, could be a college, could be a charity, could be a agency, etc. So whatever your idea is, you can start to write down in your project report, and obviously you can always go back and make changes. The best way to have the report in the right format is to use the template that I mentioned earlier that I posted and you can download. So starting with this, you should type in here your name, I already have it here, you only need to replace it. I'll remove this tag, okay, and put in here your ID, which should starting with A, and then whatever is your key. Then just scroll down, as you could see, and don't forget to change things here accordingly to your name and information. Alright, and you can go back and correct the pages later. So starting with database initial study and business situation, So whatever your idea is, type it here. And in this case, we use a business situation which is familiar to everyone, that we have it in the slides, which is basically a company that sells furniture. And now let's imagine that the company hires you and like you to build a database for them. And in this database, they like to keep track of their inventory, the sales, and also their customer. And just type in here your idea about your business situation. Then in the second part of this section, in order to define the objective and the scope and constraints of our database design, we need to look at the data that we collected, and the information we gather from interviewing business people. So here, just pretend that you talk to them and put down here data that you make up by yourself. And remember, you can always go back and change this kind of data later as you go further with your design. So let's say here in this case, we have the invoice, and we have a kind of like report of about the sales or the orders. Now, in the real world, you cannot change the data. You have to design your database so that it can hold all of this data. But in our case, because we do this project to review what we have learned so far, and if you read the requirement where you need to demonstrate many things. For example, the data need to be in a way so that later you can demonstrate the redundant relationship, and also many-to-many relationships, at least two of them, and etc. And there are other constraints. For example, you should start with 3 to 5 entities, and at the end you should not have more than 10 attributes for each entity. So therefore, that is why you could actually go back in this project to change the data around, so that later on you will get the kind of diagrams and the tables needed so that you can demonstrate all of the things listed in the requirement over here about the entity, about the relationships, and later on about the update, deletion, modification, anomaly, or partial and transitive of dependency. So besides putting the data in the report, you may like to type a few things to explain about the objective and the scope and the constraint about the data that you have. So for example here, explain that this is an invoice and this is a report, sample report that you receive from the business people. So that was the database initial study, and the next step would be conceptual design. And all you need to do is to go back to the project requirement and the instruction and just do step by step. I have instruction here. So the next step now, step 3, to do the conceptual design. you need to decide what type of ERR diagram you're going to use. In my example, I use the Crowdfoot type. And the first things that we need to do in conceptual design is to define the entities. In this case, because what we need to store in terms of data would be about the products, because that's what we have in the inventory, the customers, and the orders, which shows the sales. And in this case, the company recently expanded their business, so they have different locations of the store. So we can start with 4 entities. Now the next step would be to define the relationships between the entities, and since here we have only 4, so you can basically really look at all the possible relationships. So we have a simple math problem here, 4 entities, so there are only 4 times 3 or 12 possible relationships. So that allows us to go one by one, and then also to look at the cardinality for each relationship. And so at the end, we end up with this list, and whatever the type of the entity relationship diagram you use, you may want to include just very briefly an explanation of the notations. For example, in the Crowdfoot model or notation that I use here, I include this short explanation, and as the result now, you need to draw here a diagram that show. Now in this case, in my example, we have 4 entities, and these are the relationship between them. But if we notice that they are redundant relationships, and so we should remove them, and as the result we have a simpler diagram. Then in your example, you should have at least 2 many-to-many relationships. So here we do have 2 products. One is between products and shops, the other one's between products and order. And we all know that most of DBMS cannot handle many-to-many relationships. So we need to solve this problem, and one of the way to do that is to add an associative entity between these 2. And so as the result, we have now we added the stock entity, and now we have 5 of them. And notice that the stock entity is a weak entity. Here, just for the education purpose, we intentionally leave one of the many-to-many relationship, which is between the products and order, because we want to leave some room for our normalization later. So the last step in conceptual design is to define the attributes. So in this case, quite straightforward, and so here this shows the list of the attributes. Now for the order, it comes straight from the invoice document and the sample business report of the sale that we got here. So if you take all of this, which is 10 of them, and then you just put in here, then that's how we come up with the attributes. And then so similar for the other entities. So that's the end of step 3, or that's the end of the conceptual design.